Managing partner of Denali Group and has been consulting in the supply chain space for more than 20 years, including senior positions with McDonnell Douglas and A.T. Kearney before starting Denali Group in 1996. John has consulted with dozens of Global 500 companies in the United States, Europe, and Asia Pacific. He focuses exclusively on strategic supply chain management and has led engagements relating to supply chain and procurement transformation, strategic sourcing, supplier management and development, supply chain strategy, and logistics optimization. John has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Georgia Tech and has his MBA from Pepperdine University. So John, welcome. I'm glad you could join us today.
Thank you. Casey, if you go to the first slide. There we go. Just a quick overview of Denali in case for those of you who aren't familiar with our company. We call ourselves a procurement services company. We've evolved over the years. We started out as Denali Consulting, doing traditional consulting, but focused specifically in the supply chain space. We help companies with implement procurement transformation efforts, strategic sourcing, and category management, and really anything related to procurement, improving procurement. We also have a managed services division called Denali Sourcing Services that provides on-demand sourcing support on an ongoing basis for companies, kind of as an adjunct function to their strategic sourcing operation to allow them to have more throughput with regard to sourcing support. We have a market intelligence division called Denali Intelligence. We have through that we offer subscription-based and custom market intelligence that's focused specifically toward procurement professionals. We cover about 80 different spend categories with that service. And then we have Denali Recruiting and Staffing, which again provides recruiting and temp staffing specifically to the procurement space. As Don mentioned, we've been around since 1996, and we've worked across a pretty wide variety of industries. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll start our overview. So our team did an interesting segment this time. I think it was a pretty new format for SIG, but it was called Speaker's Corner. And we basically had four of us in a large conference room with kind of corners that were topic specific. So we had four topics, and I'll go through each of those four topics and just go through some of the highlights. But it was a very unique format that I think we really enjoyed because there was refreshments in the center, and then the participants could basically just wander from corner to corner and listen in on and participate in the different topics, four different topics. So it wasn't such a formal setting as we've had in other types of programs. So the first one of the topics was called CPO Agenda. What's next on the procurement or CPO's agenda? And that was really interesting. You know, we had a lot of good dialogue around what companies are doing today versus what's kind of next on their agenda over the next 1 to 3 years. And we had a lot of different conversations and a lot of different topics. The top three that came out, we've got listed here. One that was pretty predominant was around supplier management or supplier relationship management. You know, a lot of companies said they had really been focused a lot on strategic sourcing over the last few years. So kind of the next big agenda item for them was having a more formalized supplier management program now that they feel that they've successfully implemented pretty formalized strategic sourcing. So they're looking at a lot of companies talked about how today, once they source something, their approach to the relationship with suppliers and managing suppliers on an ongoing basis tends to be fairly informal, and that there's not as much structure and methodology and tools and technology around the whole SRM process. So that's something they were really looking to add a lot of meat to with regard to their programs. Looking at a lot of companies we talked to were in the process of looking at technology to support SRM. They were looking at just more formalized continuous improvement programs with their suppliers. Another big topic was just skills, which actually bleeds over into the next topic that I'll talk about in just a second. But there was a lot of discussion around just trying to figure out how to deal with the whole Gen Y culture and how to keep talent. Certainly almost everyone we talked to mentioned that with the new generation, and this isn't just in procurement. I think if you read any study on like Gen Y, the rate of turnover that most companies expect from that generation is much higher. It's just the nature of, people like to try new positions and move on. And there's a lot of discussion around how do you embrace that and thrive in that kind of environment as opposed to continue to fight it and just try to get turnover to be low. Maybe you can really do well by embracing high turnover. So there was a lot of discussion around how to deal with the Gen Y culture, what types of new skill sets they needed as procurement continued to evolve in terms of how they add value and some of the things that they're getting involved with, different pay structures, things like that. And then the third major topic was new ways to add value, just in general. I think there's been a lot of discussion around the focus of procurement has really been on savings over the last 10 years, and many were starting to get involved in other things like revenue generation, risk management, and other more strategic initiatives, even mergers and acquisitions. There was discussion around how the same skills that procurement uses to find good suppliers, you could apply to things like finding new companies to buy. If you're a company that's on the kind of on the trail to buy up a lot of other companies as one of growth strategies, some companies were starting to involve procurement and skill sets procurement in those areas as well. So, we're expecting in the next 1 to 3 years that I think procurement will continue to evolve in terms of where they add value. If you look over the next section, talent management specifically, we asked some of the people in the room, how and where do you find talent? What are you looking for? And what are you doing to retain it? On the topic of what you're looking for, one of the discussions was that the skills of procurement have really evolved, and they're almost very similar to the skills that you would find in a sales or business development type person now, which is very different, again, from what you might have looked for 10 years ago. You're looking for people that have the ability to sell and influence people, to lead, manage change, drive change, negotiate, strategize, analyze. So some of the analytical and negotiation skills are more traditional, but I think companies are looking outside the box and looking at sales skills and more strategic skills as well. One of the other discussions was around compensation, because if you look at those skills that I just mentioned, those are pretty in-demand skills, not just in a procurement position, but across the enterprise. And so what a lot of people are challenged with is how do we find people that are great at selling and as well as very strong analytically and strategically. Those people tend to want more money than procurement maybe has traditionally paid. So there's a lot of discussion around trying to get more creative around compensation, maybe having variable performance based on value created or dollars saved, almost like a salesperson is paid on commissions, having a procurement person paid based on value delivered or savings created, which logically makes sense, but it's something that's very different from what companies are used to. So it's something that I think companies are just starting to play around with. We haven't heard of a lot of companies actually do that yet, but it's definitely something we hear a lot of companies talking about. And then also just where they find talent. There were a lot of discussion around the procurement organizations looking within the organization, but outside of procurement, to find people to come through. And even if they're only going to spend 2 to 3 years, it's a great way to get stakeholders more involved in procurement. And then once they leave procurement and go back out to other stakeholder organizations, it's just a good long-term strategy for building support for procurement and some of the strategic initiatives that they're involved with. So those are kind of just some high-level overviews of those two topics. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll talk about the next two topics. Casey?
John, we're having a little bit of internet issue right now, so I do apologize. If you could start talking as soon as we can get the internet to stay, it's flickering right now for us a little bit. So if you don't mind, the next slide was going to be on metrics and supply chain innovation, and we're going to try and move it ahead.
Okay. So yeah, the next two, when you get to see those slides, or one is on the other two topics that we covered in the other two corners of the room were metrics, and then the other was just supply chain innovation or procurement innovation. On the topic of metrics, one of the things that we asked was just what are you doing differently to measure yourselves and Is that changing or is it evolving? One of the key takeaways was that value still is the key metric, and within value, certainly savings is something that most organizations are still measuring and expect to continue to measure. And various organizations measure savings differently. Some only look at hard, some look at hard and soft, some look at cost avoidance. There are different terms of savings that companies are looking at, but that continues to be a big one. As I mentioned, though, that as procurement organizations are starting to get into other areas of value creation, like revenue contribution, some companies are starting to measure that as well. If they're involved in something that doesn't directly involve savings, you certainly want to capture that, because some organizations may start spending 10, 20, even 30% of their time or resource doing things that don't directly relate to savings. And if that's the case, you don't want to lose that visibility of the other types of value that you're creating. So as you evolve and start getting into other areas of value, it's really important to change your metrics and your dashboards to reflect that. Certainly cycle time continues to be one. That's one that a lot of companies, procurement organizations, have been measuring for a while. Some companies are looking at ways to, not so much a performance measurement, but they're looking at measuring risk and having like rating scales for different categories of how they would rate the risk profile for that category, as well as at the supplier level. So some dashboards are starting to have metrics around that. And also some are getting into cash management. Some are even finding ways to get value out of looking at their cost of capital versus their suppliers, and in cases where the suppliers need the capital more than they do, or cash, finding ways to actually further discount what they're paying by doing some creative things there on the cash management side. And then also on supplier collaboration, finding ways to, again, if they're spending time with supplier collaboration, ultimately that might result in savings, but there might be some other benefits. So some are trying to find ways for measuring at least the activity associated with supplier collaboration. Some of the other discussions around value were that how you define value depends on the state of the enterprise, what your current business need is. If you're a business that's growing and your focus is on growth and speed, then that is going to define your metrics, as opposed to an organization that's all about cost containment. So that depends, as well as the maturity of the organization, your corporate cash needs, and to what extent your company is focused on innovation. Which leads to the last topic, which was in the last corner we had, was innovation, supply chain innovation. We asked just open-ended questions around what are some of the new innovative ways of managing your supply chain or your procurement organization. Some of the kind of the three main themes there were, one was around involving suppliers and driving revenue opportunities. Some companies were starting to use suppliers to gain share operational improvements, and then sharing revenue side commissions with suppliers that could help drive revenue. We've heard discussions of especially companies that are going into new markets overseas where maybe they don't have a strong local presence, but the suppliers they're starting to use locally do. So they're actually using their suppliers to help them get into local markets, and then creating some type of incentive for their suppliers to help them do that, which is a very non-traditional way to get value from your suppliers, obviously. Some discussion around open book financial relationships. It's certainly not a new concept, but some companies were talking about trying to take friction out of the whole way of doing commerce, and that this is something they're starting to look at again, especially just given new technologies and times. I think the whole open book relationship was pretty popular, I would say, or companies were starting to do it back in the early 90s when strategic alliances and partnerships were kind of in vogue. And it's something that's kind of gone away over the last 10 or 15 years. And, there was discussion about that some companies were starting to look at that again and find ways to get value from that again and using it in a different way. And then another topic, which I thought was pretty interesting, was around the whole co-location with suppliers. Now, a lot of companies have co-located their suppliers on their facilities, but some companies talked about actually doing just the opposite, of having their buyers co-located their suppliers' facilities as a way to give feedback to the suppliers on how their products might be changed by understanding in more detail around the types of technologies and new product innovations that their suppliers might have, that try to understand how that might add additional value back in their own customer organization. So it's a different twist to just getting in bed with your suppliers, and I thought something that was pretty innovative as well. And again, we had, over the course of a couple of hours, we had just a huge laundry list of innovation practices, as well as from these other three topics. But these are just some of the ones that we thought were more interesting to cover today. So that covers the...
I was going to ask you a question that came in that said that you've engaged with CPOs for some time now. What is the biggest change you're seeing in the role of a CPO? When
we talk to CPOs and ask how their role has changed, probably the most common thing that we hear a lot is that they've gone from managing a functional organization and kind of having their blinders on and just trying to manage procurement to being more of a stakeholder manager. We hear CPOs saying they spend at least half their time basically meeting with their internal customers and trying to either get them involved in strategic procurement initiatives or sharing information with them about how procurement can help them with their business goals, but really just trying to engage stakeholders more. So that's probably the biggest change that we hear, and we ask that question a lot. How is your role changing? What do you, in terms of specifically what you're doing? And that's probably uniformly the most common theme that we hear.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we're going to move on to Beeline next. And so I have the pleasure of introducing you to Colleen Tyner, and she's the VP of Product Development at Beeline. She's been with the Contingent Workforce Solutions team for quite some time now. She spent 15 years in business-to-business software development and 7 years at Beeline helping to drive product strategies and advancements to solve your challenges related to sourcing and managing the flexible workforce. So Colleen, welcome. I'm glad you could join us today. I had the pleasure of seeing a bunch of your colleagues at an event this week, so it's always nice to visit with folks from Beeline. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Beeline? Oh, I think we have you on mute, so even if you're trying to talk, you can't, so we need to unmute you. I'm sorry. There you go.
I was trying to talk, but apparently only to myself. Thank you, Dawn. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're able to meet some of the Beeline colleagues this week. I do want to thank both you and Casey and the SIG team for allowing us to participate in the valuable executive roundtable discussions. They were incredibly informative for us, and I am very happy to be sharing the things that we took away and the key learnings from that, from those sessions that we were able to facilitate. So thank you. Our first, let me introduce Beeline. That would be a good place to start. We are a market leader in flexible workforce solutions. We provide premier software coupled with exceptional service. That's a key for Beeline. We are in our 13th year, and our size, stability, and market knowledge and our global expertise in our space is what has put us on top in a field of growing importance. Likely, the flexible workforce is one of your largest spend categories. So it's a very important and growing area of importance for procurement. So the topics that you can go to the next slide, the topics that we covered, we actually had 2 facilitated sessions. The first one, the specific question was, what does it take for an organization to consistently increase their spend under management, and how can they continue to deliver savings? Initially, the group decided that we needed to ask ourselves if we were even asking the right question or if that was the right problem statement. Was their goal actually to increase spend under management? And the group decided that the real problem statement they wanted to tackle was, what does it take for their organization to sustain or increase the level of value that they provide to the company? So the difference between the 2 questions was that as a sourcing or procurement group achieves a goal such as cost savings or control, those goals convert from a value-added win to new levels of expectation, and that over time increases the value that they provide to the company. So it may not always mean increasing spend under management. So that was a very important topic, and it took us a little time to actually hone down the question to something that the group felt was relevant. So that alone was very insightful. Some practical advice from the group and topics that were discussed. The first one was understand the needs of your business constituents. That was the hottest topic. It was the first one that sort of came out and resonated with everyone. The key here was to become integrated with the team so that you, as a procurement specialist, can truly know how the business operates, how they work, and what they need. You learn their language. You speak in the context of that language, not in your sourcing speak. That was a key lesson. And you share data with them about how they are sourcing and where you can help them do a better job. Grow or hire strategists to understand how a given business unit operates. So rather than just hiring generalists, think about people who have a specialty when you add to your team, you augment your team that really understands how your business operates. So that was a very interesting topic for the group. One of my favorites was the solve the big ugly. This one I thought was pretty funny, but it was repeated several times, and everyone got a kick out of it. But really what it means is to be willing to take on anything in order to help a business unit deal with a problem supplier or help them solve a really hairy issue, all without you getting credit for it. Because when you do that, when you proactively offer your services as procurement, then you build a hero and an advocate within that business unit. And over time, you earn credibility and respect with them, and that later turns into better adoption of your policies and practices. So that was an interesting topic, and I thought very creative of that executive group as well. Another topic that came up, the wording that they came up with was great: relentless pressure, yet gently applied. Approach those hard-to-influence business units. Specific business units that came up were business units like legal, marketing, audit, and consultancy, with persistence, not aggression. So it's very important to find that fine line between persistence and aggression, and consistently and firmly remind them of the opportunities they might be losing by not engaging sourcing, all while maintaining that supportive perspective. Again, looking for the big ugly that you can help them solve, and then that will come up as a value later when you're relentlessly applying pressure. And then finally, success breeds success. So demonstrate what works. When you back up your successful actions with data, and data is king, that's another phrase that came up quite a bit. When you back up that successful action with data, it's hard to deny the value, and the business will partner with you rather than be resistant. So those were some key lessons to that question of what does it take for an organization to sustain or increase the level of value they provide. And that specifically is speaking of that sourcing organization. So the next slide. So talent, the next one was really around talent retention. And this specific topic was an interesting one, and actually ended up, as you can see from the slide, with a lot of information and suggestions from the group. It was quite a topic. So the number one tip for finding talent that spanned all types of positions and level of experience was to go beyond a job description. Collaborate with your recruiters, with HR, or whoever's helping you find talent, and allow them to have real insight into what you need so that they know what you are really seeking. This was important because just as sourcing is the group to go to when you want to purchase something, HR, recruiting, they're the people with the specialty for finding talent, and that's who you should go to and really collaborate with them and give them the insight they need to bring back the talent that you need. The remaining insights break down into two categories of talent. So the other ones that we're going to talk about, seasoned and experienced, and then less experienced. So starting with the seasoned and experienced talent that you might be looking for. Look outside of your industry. We learned at the SIG event, there was a speaker, Stephen Shapiro, that taught us that sometimes you might be trying to solve the wrong problem. So instead of asking, how do I find a good sourcing person who knows the pharmaceutical industry, maybe you need to look in insurance, finance, technology or food service industries for that person, not just in your pharmaceutical industry if that's the industry that you're in. So really expand outside of your industry, because there is some experience out there that you can that is transferable to your industry that you might not be catching. The other one was to diversify your recruiting efforts. Find talent through the various channels. Social media, hands down, should absolutely be one of them. Definitely use suppliers, definitely use recruiters, and use your networks. Know when a position will be hard to fill, and then strategically plan your approach to filling that. Another was empower your veterans to make a difference. So giving your seasoned and experienced team members the autonomy and authority to affect change in the organization. That was definitely a topic of great discussion. People really want a purpose, and they want to feel that what they do matters. And when those seasoned and experienced team members get to be involved, it really does make a difference. And the other thing that was mentioned was that compensation isn't everything. The next one, the topic that came up under experience, looking for seasoned and experienced professionals, is invest in your people, support their ongoing education, challenge them with projects to build the department, and then offer them face time with C-level executives to share their ideas. Again, it goes beyond compensation to really retain that talent that you have brought in as your seasoned professionals. And as we'll get to in just a minute, the seasoned and experienced professionals are incredibly important because they are who are involved in growing the less experienced into those professionals, those seasoned professionals that you need later. So that's another very important factor. And then look at multiple dimensions. Measure more than what your team achieves, but measure how those outcomes were achieved. That again was a big topic. So that may go to how you manage their goals, but it really is more about measuring not just what, but how they achieve those goals, and was there innovation and creativity. Another topic that came up was to celebrate transitioning within the company. Good talent seeks a challenge, and sometimes that challenge is not in the role that they're currently in. So when you embrace their movement within the organization, you celebrate it, you expect it, you might even drive it, you actually draw in additional talent. So talking about the less experienced talent, so these are, when you want to maybe spend less, or you want to bring in and grow a team or a portion of a team, you can find promising less experienced workers, and you can entice them to work in sourcing, which is in itself not an obvious choice for most people, and you can retain them. And the keys to that this executive roundtable found were the most important. Number one was to hire the right skills. The recommendation here was to when hiring less experienced talent, to fill the roles and activities where you know that they can excel. Those roles and activities are things like that require critical thinking and analysis. So business analysis came up, data analysis came up. Those are the areas where you bring in someone who has that raw material, that raw talent, but then can be honed and mentored by your more seasoned professionals to grow those skills and add more value. Internships and college programs were discussed. There are lots of excellent sources of ambitious, smart, and analytical talent in internships and college programs, so you should definitely be thinking about that. College grad programs and internships are definitely an emphasis for this group of executives that was discussing talent retention. And then hire to fit your culture. This was a deep discussion about fostering an environment of learning and mutual respect between new up-and-coming talent and seasoned veterans. Neither yourself nor the talent you find will be successful if the company culture does not fit the person. So really fostering that environment of learning and then making sure that culture fit is there is very, very important in your hiring process, especially on those newcomers. And then the last one, hire for now, not 3 years from now. This one surprised me a little bit, and I didn't realize this trend was as significant as it seemed to be in this group. But the need to accept short-term commitments from these new up-and-comers or these new promising, less experienced workers, and they also call them resume builders. There may be someone out there that when you interview, they have a lot of promise, but they're likely not going to stay for 3 years. that's okay. It's a resume builder for them. It's a win-win when new talent can prove themselves, and it also helps you reach your goals. The reality is they will likely move on to the next big challenge, but you should take advantage of this dynamic rather than fighting against it, looking for that long tenure. So that was a very insightful conversation with this executive team as well. So in talking about the winning the war on talent topic, those were some key insights and learnings from the Executive Roundtable. And again, Don, I really want to thank you and SIG for giving Beeline the opportunity to facilitate that discussion.
Colleen, this is Amanda Friedrichsen. I apologize, but it seems that the Florida office has lost internet connection, so I'll take over from here. I have a couple of questions that came in. So you mentioned that compensation isn't everything. Were there alternatives discussed, specific alternatives?
To compensation? Absolutely.
Yes.
There was a lot of topics, especially around your seasoned veterans, that really what they're looking for is autonomy and the authority to affect change. So rather than focusing necessarily on bonuses and compensation, giving them the space to be creative and to affect change in the organization, giving them face time with C-level executives to share their ideas, those were two very tangible topics that the executive team said that that's really what those veterans are looking for, because it provides them the acknowledgement. And then finally, the supporting their ongoing education and sending them to things like SIG and other areas where they can gain additional knowledge, that is really valuable for that group as well. So I think those were three key learnings around compensation isn't everything. That's a great question.
So I'm curious, was there an aha moment when you were in the session with the CXOs?
The aha moment for me and I think for the group was really in the talent retention, winning the war on talent roundtable. I think there were lots of aha moments, and all of these that one moved very, very quickly, and I think all of these sort of encompass the moments of aha. I think the biggest aha moment in the topic around what does it take for an organization to consistently increase their spend under management, I really think that was when they were challenging the question of, is it really about increasing your spend under management? This, for me, was a group of sourcing executives saying, our point, our purpose is to provide value to the company. That may or may not mean increasing spend under management, but that's not the only way to add value, and there were so many other ways to add value to the organization, and that really opened up the topic to even broader discussion. So I think that was the aha moment in that session as well.
Yeah, I love that, looking at the big picture, not just about savings. That's great. Well, thank you so much. I will bring us on to the SNR Denton sessions that they presented. One of them was risk, and I'm going to do my best to give you a quick overview of that session on risk. So they talked about a few different areas. One would be, of course, cyber risk. So they were saying not just about security as well when it came to that risk. Many government audits, federal audits, things like that. That was an area of risk for the attendees. And then, of course, everything came back to protect your brand. That was, of course, the number one thing that everything comes down to. So there was some discussion about whether or not people were using chief risk officers, and there were definitely some of those companies in the room that do have those, as well as it was suggested that to have an emergency communications team and the importance of that. So it was definitely a good session. I apologize that Ross Doxey, who facilitated that session, isn't here, but I'm sure that we can put you in touch with him if you wanted to discuss some of those details more. Another topic, another session that we offered was outsourcing trends. So from that session, the number one biggest outsourcing trend today would be in the cloud computing. They were talking about what drives it, and it was also discussed absolutely outsourcing is here to stay. That resonated with everybody in the room, but they did talk about how more companies are looking to do more outsourced because of the efficiency and the speed that it provides, the expertise that you can find by doing that, and then, of course, the cost savings. So I'm sure that part of their discussions were probably looking back towards that area of risk when you are outsourcing. But as I said, they were discussing that it was here to stay. Many of the companies are outsourcing their core competencies, which was interesting. And it was also discussed that the innovation is most likely going to come from the U.S. It's going to come domestically, and that it made more sense to buy the raw materials in some of those places where they were doing their outsourcing and let them take care of the manufacturing there. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this webinar, this special webinar of the Executive Roundtable Report Outs. Simon, Colleen, and John, thank you so much for joining us today. We will have the recording of this webinar available on the SIG website for all SIG members. We'll also share it with all of the registrants today. So thank you so much for joining us. Please, everyone, have a great day.